Hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks for tuning in to News 9 Live. I'm Kabir Naqvi and you're watching this special broadcast of top stories from our studios here in the National Capital Region. We have an expansive list of stories to cover here, ladies and gentlemen. 55th day of that West Asian conflict between Israel and Hamas. What's happening on the war front over there? Are we looking at a possible 7th day of the truce or not? That's going to be our focus. In Nepal, the first gay couple has officially been registered. When you look at Pakistan vis-a-vis Imran Khan and the acquittal of Nawaz Sharif, it's really interesting because delimitation is also a problem for Pakistan. All of that is happening. Climate change is going to be our focus this bulletin as well, because our Prime Minister, he's in UAE. It's COP28. He's going to be there for another 2 days. And climate change was a big part of India's G20 presidency as well, which the Prime Minister has put out has authored a huge article today across all major dailies saying that India's G20 presidency was in fact for the world. We'll also showcase what's happening with those trapped workers that are now outside the tunnel. 400 plus hours, those grueling moments, what in terms of treatment. But at the top of our news hour this time around is the West's double standard on terror that has again been exposed. Take a look at this. The US has accused an Indian of allegedly plotting to kill Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. According to a charge sheet that was filed by the US Department of Justice, a man named Nikhil Gupta worked with an unnamed Indian official to set up a meeting with an undercover agent tasked with eliminating Pannun on US soil. The indictment reveals that the plot to assassinate Gurpatwant Pannun was orchestrated by an employee of an Indian government agency, self-identifying as a quote-unquote senior field officer responsible for security management and intelligence. The individual claims to have served in India's Central Reserve Police Force, receiving training in battlecraft and weaponry. And he's been referred as CC1 in the indictment, and this government employee had recruited a man called Nikhil Gupta in May to carry out the assassination. The indictment says that Gupta contacted an individual that he believed to be a criminal associate to help find a hitman to carry out the killing. But the individual actually was a confidential source who was working with the DEA. Now the confidential source then introduced Gupta to a purported hitman, but the individual was actually a DEA agent according to the indictment. It is being alleged that a payment of $100,000, that's about 1 lakh rupees, was to be made for the job. Now, the MEA says that it takes the charges very seriously and has set up a high-level probe panel to examine the issue. Pannun holds dual citizenship for United States and Canada and has very recently threatened to bomb Air India as well. The NIA has filed a case against him in this matter. We have reactions that are coming across from the Ministry of External Affairs, but before that, joining me here in the studio is my colleague and Executive Editor for Strategic Affairs, Aditya Rajkol. Aditya, many thanks for joining with us here. We've been talking about this Khalistan issue ever since the resurgence of Khalistan. You've been doing some great documentaries on that as well. But take a look at what's happening in the past couple of months. That Time article that came out, you had the Amritpal issue, that Nijjar killing happened, him being killed on Canadian soil. India-Canada relations got currently soured. We've just recently opened the visa applications again for all those people who want to travel. Your first initial comments, before we delve into the hypocrisy, the dichotomy, and how the stand on terror has been exposed by the West yet again, your initial comments on what's really happening. How are you taking a look at all of this? Can you help the viewers understand what's happening?
Well, the first reaction that I had was of shock and disbelief. But then I went through the documents that were released yesterday by the Department of Justice in United States that clearly say that, a man called Nikhil Gupta, who has been later in June arrested by Czech Republic and has been extradited since then to the United States and is in US custody. Now, it's very important to go through those documents, those 15 pages, to realize that there's no evidence. There is simply no evidence that United States has. They've just believed some character called Nikhil Gupta, who himself seems to be a dubious character, a suspicious man who does not have any direct links or is a representative of the government of India. Apart from some wild phone calls that the US, CIA and others say they have,
which they haven't put out in the open.
Which they haven't put out in the open. And it could be anybody. We know about the gangsters that are operating in Punjab, mostly sitting in Canada, US and UK, that have killed people even in Indian Punjab, including Sidhu Moosewala.
Right.
So that's an open case. There's no, nothing new being revealed here. There are gangsters, there are drug traffickers that are involved in killings in Indian Punjab, that are involved in killings in Canada. And India has been warning Canada and US for a very long time that take action against the organized crime syndicate and the Palestinian network. Otherwise, it will be a problem in your own backyard. And that's what these US and Canada are facing. Of course, the US has shared some details with the Indian counterparts. And India, on the basis of that, has ordered a probe, which only suggests that India takes these matters very seriously. But again, who is this Nikhil Gupta? Nobody knows who this Nikhil Gupta character is. Who was he in touch with in India or in the United States?
Another question is about this purported guy who was working with the DEA, this source. Who is this person? Who's the DEA source? That you're right, there is not much to corroborate what has been written in that indictment. But this stand on on terror by the West, and this dichotomy that has been exposed yet again, hasn't it? I was speaking to Ambassador Goel in the morning. Several examples that he had given, to the viewers as well, about how military movement in the Middle East, when United States perspective is to be looked at, how they tackle terror, and it's okay when they're doing it. But when we're trying to raise a voice of concern that, look, maybe the snake is rearing its head again in your backyard, you don't want to do it owing to political convenience.
You know, the West over the last few years, and especially in the last 2 years, has been a little jittery. With the way India has approached things. India's independent stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. India's independent thinking in the Israel-Hamas conflict. India talking about this not being an era of war. India speaking about the humanitarian aid that should be given to people both in Gaza as well as in Ukraine and other places. Apart from that, India being a very important player in a global peacenik. So I think the US seems to be a little jittery in that regard. And of course, when Canada was called out, the kind of embarrassment that Justin Trudeau faced both in India as well as in his home country Canada wasn't easy for the Five Eyes intelligence to digest, more so for US and Canada. So I think they do not have much evidence at this particular stage. And the question can be asked to them that what action have you taken against organized crime? What action have you taken against the Palestinian networks? There are 26 extradition requests that have been sent out to Canada in the last 15 years. No action has been taken against them.
None at all.
None at all. And it clearly indicates the hypocrisy also of the West when it comes to dealing with terrorism, as you rightly pointed out. You know, there is this Western idea of democracy, which they want to apply across South Asia and across the globe. And if somebody does not abide by it, of course, they don't like it. They don't like the kind of democracy that was there in Afghanistan. So they attacked it, and when they couldn't do much, they withdrew. Similarly with India, Pakistan and other countries as well, they want their idea of democracy and their viewpoint of the fight against terrorism to be applicable. They do not want India to emerge as a leader of the global south. They do not want India to emerge as the most vocal leading voice against terrorism, against radicalization, because they are jittery. So I think it's important to, wait and watch what happens in this particular case, because for long, Khalistani so-called activism and terrorism has been used to extend and expand the foreign policy goals of US and Canada for a very long time, even UK for that matter. So India does not need to worry. These are tactics that are applied by the West to apply pressure.
Right.
And India has nothing to hide. India believes in fighting terrorism, in radicalization. It was okay to hit Soleimani with a drone strike. It was okay to send US Navy SEALs in Pakistan, violating the sovereignty both of Pakistan and Iran. But,
but it was needed.
It was needed. But they do not believe in acting against the Khalistani terrorism in the same way.
Which is where they end up weaponizing human rights per se as well.
Absolutely.
And whilst we're talking about all of this, because every time I see the Prime Minister meeting with Joe Biden, whether it be that full state visit in the United States or Biden here during the G20, which is again one of those prominent places where India pretty much made it clear to the world that this is a unique summit, this is voice of the global south, and you'll have to listen to us this time around. And this is not going to change, we're here to stay. But I'm more interested in understanding what's going to happen between the US-India relations in this particular situation, because the bonhomie between these two world leaders, they look like they're some lost brothers at the Kumbh Ka Mela, the way they shake hands and hug it out when the cameras are facing them. Do you think relationships are going to get sour? What's your opinion on that front?
I don't think so. I think this will continue for some time, but there will be diplomacy at play. Exactly what has happened with India and Canada. Visa was completely ended, and soon after, just in a matter of weeks, we've had the visa again being started. We also have backroom diplomacy dialogue that is underway. I can tell you now that 2 former High Commissioners that India had in Canada, Ajay Bisaria and Vikas Swarup, were recently in dialogue with the Canadian High Commissioner and the former Canadian High Commissioner Nadir Patel as well. So there is diplomacy at play, there is dialogue that is happening, and similar things will happen with US as well, and the Indian side will try to make US understand that these tactics are not going to work anymore. This is an India of today, not an India of yesterday. And India knows how to deal with these tactics and these pressure tactics.
Well, the Ministry of External Affairs, ladies and gentlemen, very recently conducted a press conference. They haven't given much information, and it's quite rightly understandable why they wouldn't want to do that, because there is diplomacy and dialogue that's taking place. Let's not jump the gun here. But let's listen in to how the Ministry of External Affairs, the spokesperson Arindam Bagchi, how did he navigate and tackle these kind of questions on Canada and the United States. Both listen in.
During the course of discussions with the US on bilateral security cooperation, the US side shared some inputs pertaining to nexus between organized criminals, gun runners, terrorists, other extremists. We take, of course, such inputs very seriously, and a high-level inquiry committee has been constituted to look into all the relevant aspects of the matter. And necessary follow-up action will be taken based on the findings of the inquiry committee. You would have seen this in our statements that we have issued. We cannot share any further information on such security matters. As regards the case against an individual that has been filed in a US court, allegedly linking him to an Indian official, this is a matter of concern. We have said, and let me reiterate, that this is also contrary to government policy. The nexus between organized crime, trafficking, gun running, and extremists at an international level is a serious issue for law enforcement agencies and organizations to consider. And it is precisely for that reason that a high-level inquiry committee has been constituted, and we will obviously be guided by its results. On the issue of Canada, insofar as Canada is concerned, we have said that they have consistently given space to anti-India extremists and violence, and that is actually the heart of the issue. Our diplomatic representatives in Canada have borne the brunt of this, so we expect the government of Canada to live up to its obligations under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. We have also seen interference by Canadian diplomats in our internal affairs. We've said this from this podium, and that is obviously unacceptable.
So Arindam Bagchi, spokesperson for the MEA, saying that India is taking all of this very seriously. Now, Aditya, even as India is taking this seriously, and like I said, let's not jump the gun, just a couple of brief questions. In terms of the senior officer that is being quoted that he's from the CRPF, he's got some battle tank, training, he's got weaponry training. I was speaking to Ambassador Goel in the morning, and he was of the opinion that CRPF don't get tank training, tank battle training. There are a lot of discrepancies in what the US thinks this CRPF guy is doing and what actually is happening with the CRPF training back at home. But senior official, does this raise an eyebrow?
Well, they are trying to frame the intelligence.
Considering you've gone through the 15 pages.
The US is trying to frame an Indian intelligence agency, more so the RNAW. But it doesn't have any definitive proof, it doesn't have any details, any evidence to point that out. I think this is just like a theatrical, some kind of a script that has been hatched by the US that clearly indicates that it's a senior field officer, we know who he is, he has had work with the CRPF in the past, he has battle training, not realizing that battle training is only given to, the army personnel or the NSG personnel or the commandos, and not the CRPF personnel, which is a central reserve police force. Only some units of it work near the border areas in Jammu and Kashmir, and they also do not operate in the border areas but in the city limits of Srinagar and other districts, and are part of encounters with terrorists, not a war-like situation or for instance the armored corps of the army. So I think the entire story is not clear. I think US still needs to work on the script a little more.
Funny indictment, I'll tell you what. You don't really know where to put your finger on it. And let me tell you, Aditya, In my limited opinion, I think this is going to impact West's credibility when it comes to fighting terror and their anti-terror movement. That is certainly going to take a hit.
And the problem here is that they are going to blindly believe an arms supplier or a drug trafficker as a potential witness and the prime witness in this particular case, and not India, which is the largest and the biggest democracy in the world.
And asking the right questions.
And a very close ally of the United States. I mean, India has had a track record of fighting terrorism, radicalization, even calling out US and Canada when it has to on these same issues. And India has supported US's fight against terrorism for a very long time. So I think the US, the Canada and the West will have to reflect, will have to change their position and do some course correction in the coming weeks and months.
All right, Aditya, many thanks for joining with us here on this special edition. Let's see, we'll have to wait and find out as to what happens on both fronts, the West front and how the MEA is now going to move the chess pieces on this diplomatic chessboard. Many thanks for joining with us. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this. Let's talk a little bit about the neo-Khalistani movement as well, which is making resurgence once again and amping up their anti-India stance. Most of the support for the Khalistani extremists comes from abroad and has very few supporters in Punjab. Take a look at this. Fringe groups in Sikh diaspora, particularly in Canada and the United Kingdom, and some in the United States, has been vocal supporters of the Khalistani movement. The India-Canada diplomatic row over the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Sikh extremist. Now, neo-Khalistanis and the neo-Khalistani activities include the organization of referendums for Khalistan in Canada, Australia and other Western countries, and the vandalization of the Indian High Commission in London, and the recent attempt to set fire to the Indian consulate in San Francisco, besides the clashes between pro-India and pro-Khalistan elements in Australia as well. On the other hand, the United States has charged an Indian man in the US for hatching a plan to assassinate, something that Aditya and I were just talking about. Now, who is Gurpatwant Singh Pannun? That's also a big question for those of you don't know who Pannun is. Now, India has officially listed Pannun as a terrorist since the year 2020 for his seditious activities. Pannun is an immigration attorney in the United States and a dual US-Canada citizen. Meanwhile, he is the legal advisor and spokesperson for Sikhs for Justice. Now, SFJ, the Sikhs for Justice, it's a group that promotes the creation of a separate Khalistan state. Pannun organizes referendums for seeking Khalistan state in US, UK, Canada and Australia. And that's not all. Gurpatwant Pannun has threatened Hindu Indians in Canada, well, to leave Canada once and for all. Pannun shares threatening social media messages to Indian leaders, and that's also something that he is habitual of, not something that's new. He has been doing this for a long time. In terms of other international diplomacy, it's important to note whether a potential 7th day of the truce in this West Asian conflict, will that hold or not? Next up, our segment on the Israel-Hamas war. The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being. And the war between Israel and Hamas has now entered its 55th day. Let's get you the latest updates from the war front on your screens first. Take a look at this. 16 hostages were released in the 6th batch of hostages swap. Meanwhile, there's a temporary ceasefire which is going to continue into another day. This coming in from the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, the latest swap that saw 16 hostages being released in the 6th batch, it had 12 Israelis and 4 Thai nationals as part of the 16 people. On the other hand, 30 Palestinian prisoners are going to be freed, which include 16 minors and 14 women. Now, IDF has put out a tweet. It says that this temporary ceasefire is going to continue. But Hamas, from all the reports that we've picked up, they're saying what is being proposed to extend the truce is not the best propositions that have been brought to the table. Meanwhile, a total of 70 Israelis and 210 Palestinian prisoners have been released so far ever since the truce began just 6.5 days back. Meanwhile, 1,400 plus aid trucks, because aid trucks was one of those prerequisites that had to be looked after if the truce was going to take place. 1,400 plus aid trucks have now been let into Gaza. In terms of the death toll, 14,000, nearly 15,000 Palestinians killed, out of which 6,200, nearly 6,200 are children. This, even as the Palestine Red Cross Society said that it has delivered 21 trucks of aid into Gaza. But important to note here, Israel's military has announced that the truce with Hamas will persist. The decision is based on ongoing mediation efforts to facilitate the release of hostages, contingent upon the terms of existing agreements. As of now, Hamas has not issued a comment on this particular matter. The reports that we picked up, just like I mentioned before, not really happy with the proposals that have been put on the table. Now, the 6-day cessation of hostilities in Gaza, initially set to conclude at 7 a.m. local time, follows the recent exchange of the 16 Hamas-held hostages for 30 Palestinian prisoners just last night. Meanwhile, Hamas said that to seek a 4-day truce extension as the 6th group of hostages is set to be freed. That's one of the intentions of Hamas as well. Israel has said it's willing to prolong halt in fighting by 24 hours for every 10 hostages released. The USA, Qatar mediators are pushing for a larger deal that could see civilian men and soldiers return back home. The ongoing truce is scheduled to expire early Thursday after a 6-day pause in the conflict sparked by the deadly Hamas assault. But now there's an IDF tweet that's come out, and it says that, well, this truce is in fact going to persist. 16 people who were released by Hamas on Wednesday were met with celebrations and cheers on the streets. You're looking at those pictures as well. Hugs galore, hugs everywhere. People can't fathom that their loved ones are back home. And the convoys that they drove through Israel were met with Israeli flags and fireworks. The group of civilians included Israelis, it included dual nationals and Thai citizens, according to officials. As part of the exchange deal under the truce, Israel will now release 30 Palestinian prisoners, 30, that is, 16 minors and 14 women prisoners. And in a repeat of scenes over the past 6 days during the humanitarian pause in hostilities, the civilians were released to the International Committee of Red Cross and then driven in their vehicles into Israel. The hostages freed were among some of the 240 plus people that were seized by Hamas gunmen during the rampage into southern Israel on the 7th of October's onslaught. Meanwhile, shifting our focus a little bit towards the east, where you've got Jerusalem. A gruesome shooting attack in Jerusalem took place during morning rush hour, and it has left at least 7 people wounded. Israel's Magen David Adom ambulance service reported that the incident occurred at one of the city's entrances. Ambulances and police have quickly responded to the scene. Pictures on your screens, ladies and gentlemen. Authorities have confirmed that the 2 suspected attackers were neutralized right there on the spot. Israeli media is reporting that the shooting took place near a bus stop. Now, Magen David Adom reveals that 2 of the wounded are currently in a critical condition. Some of those pictures for you to breathe. Meanwhile, international diplomacy, people are sitting in various quarters in different parts of the world talking about what's happening in Gaza. Take a look at this. Now, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he has urged a comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza and tangible progress towards a 2-state solution. These proposals were presented to the United Nations Security Council as part of China's initiative to address the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Listen in.
The Palestinian question is the core of the Middle East issue, and it must be prioritized, not marginalized on the international agenda. Only when the 2-state solution is fully implemented can the Middle East enjoy genuine peace and Israel enjoy lasting security. China calls for the convening of a more broad-based, authoritative and more effective international peace conference to further build consensus for peace and to work out a concrete timetable and a roadmap to push for a comprehensive, just and lasting solution to the Palestinian question.
And whilst we're at it, let's also take a look at how India is changing its stance as well. India has supported the UN resolution calling upon Israel to withdraw from the Golan Heights. Now, India was among the 91 nations to have voted in favor of the resolution at the United Nations. Now, the document, it said that the UNGA reiterates its demand for Israel to withdraw from all occupied Syrian Golan to the line of June 4, 1967. In compliance with the relevant Security Council resolutions. 91 countries, including India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, China, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq and Indonesia, amongst others, voted in favor of the resolution at the United Nations. There was a little picture as well that showed you all the countries exactly who's voted for, who's voted against, who's abstained. Now, meanwhile, 8 countries, Australia, United Kingdom, United States, Palau, Micronesia, Israel, Canada and the Marshall Islands have all voted against this UNGA resolution. Meanwhile, shifting our focus here, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he has today authored an article across all major national dailies today, highlighting the nation's extraordinary achievements in revitalizing and amplifying the global South's voice and championing development and women's empowerment during India's G20 presidency particularly. Now, as Brazil prepares to take over the presidency, Prime Minister Modi expressed confidence that India's contributions will resonate for years, emphasizing the inclusive, ambitious and action-oriented approach outlined in the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. Take a look at some of the quotations from the article that has been authored by the Indian Prime Minister. India achieved the extraordinary during G20 presidency. And reflecting on the challenges faced during India's G20 chairmanship, Modi underscored the need for a fundamental reform of multilateralism, advocating for the prioritization of collective aspirations over the interests of a few. India's unique Voice of the Global South Summit signifies a new era where developing countries actively shape the global narrative, reinforcing the commitment to inclusivity and marking the G20 presidency as a quote-unquote people's presidency of the world's largest democracy. In addressing critical global issues, including climate, justice, gender, equality, and development financing, Prime Minister Modi outlined India's pivotal role in all of these. From the successful completion of the Digital Public Infrastructure Repository to advocating for trillions of dollars in development financing, India has emerged as a driving force in global technological collaboration and sustainable progress. The focus on humanitarianism over hostility and the dedication to women-led development exemplify India's impactful leadership during its G20 presidency. And moving on to some stories about domestic politics and about events that are taking place back at home. The 41 laborers that were trapped in the Silkyara Dandalgaon tunnel in Uttarkashi for about 70 days, 400 plus hours, are all healthy after the ordeal. However, was this tragedy avoidable is the big question. According to a report in the Hindi daily Dainik Bhaskar, some key aspects were overlooked during the tunnel's construction. The report says that there were significant disparities between the tunnel's proposed plan and its actual construction. Take a look at this. According to the Daily, the tunnel was built in an earthquake-prone area on lime rock and faced high risk of collapse due to blind shear zones. Moreover, the use of explosives during construction compromised the safety protocols of the construction. This, even as the request for proposal on the government website outlined 3 emergency exits, yet none of them were built. Safety measures like use of Hume pipes was also something that was being overlooked. And shifting our focus from Uttarkashi to Gujarat, where a blast in the storage tank claimed 7 lives and injured 24 at a facility owned by chemicals manufacturer Aether Industries in the Sachin GIDC industrial area of Surat. The The cause of the explosion, which occurred early on Wednesday, is yet to be determined. But according to the Ceasefire official, Om Prakash Mishra, they are close to getting down to the reason and ascertaining why did the blast happen. Although the result was the fire, which was later extinguished, investigations into the incident are currently underway. Officials reported that the fire at around 2 a.m. It could be seen a thick plume of smoke that rose around the building. The incident was triggered by an explosion in a sizable chemical storage tank.
सचिन जीआईडीसी में एथर इंडस्ट्रीज करके एक इंडस्ट्रीज है, इसमें रात को तकरीबन 1:30 बजे के आसपास कोई भी वजह से आग लगी है, वो बुझाने की कार्यवाही चालू है। बुझाने के लिए एसएमसी के फायर फाइटर्स, जीआईडीसी के फायर फाइटर्स, प्राइवेट जो कंपनीज है, कलर टैक्स है, हजीरा की, ओएनजीसी, क्रिप्को को अस्पताल में दाखिल भर्ती करवाया है।
सर, आग कितने बजे लगी थी, कितने फायर फाइटर आए?
तकरीबन 1:30 बजे के आसपास।
सर, अभी फिलहाल क्या कार्रवाई चल रही है?
अभी कार्रवाई आप देख रहे हैं कि आग बुझाने की जो कार्यवाही है तकरीबन 90-95% बुझ गई है, 5% बाकी है, वो भी चालू है कार्यवाही।
Meanwhile, shifting our focus back to some top international developments and take a look at this. Henry Kissinger, the Nobel Peace Prize winner and influential figure in U.S. foreign policy, passed away on Wednesday at his Connecticut home, as confirmed by Kissinger Associates Incorporation. Despite being the age of 100, Kissinger remained engaged and active in various activities, including attending White House meetings, publishing a book on leadership, and providing testimony on North Korea's nuclear threat before a Senate committee. Now, Kissinger had a hand in many epoch-changing global events of the 1970s, including the Vietnam War, the diplomatic opening of China as well. And that's not all. He also helped in expanding ties between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Meanwhile, Kissinger has been considered to be one of the first American officials to enter China since 1949. His secret trip in 1971 to China changed the face of U.S.-China relations. U.S. diplomatic ties with China was a significant hallmark of Nixon presidency, and his secret trip resulted in Nixon's presidential trip to China in 1972. The trip was possible as the U.S. kept sending feelers to China through Pakistan. Kissinger chose 3 people to go to China with him on a secret trip. The U.S. administration made an announcement that he would visit Vietnam, Thailand, India and Pakistan. The game plan was to go off secretly to Beijing from Pakistan. He pleaded illness and said was going to a Pakistani hill station to recuperate. However, Kissinger came down with a real stomachache when he was in India, and Kissinger left for China from Pakistan, where he was actually not well. In China, U.S. group discussed with Zhou Enlai for 17 hours, and China invited President Nixon to visit the country, changing the Cold War era history. But now, let's take a look at Kissinger's role in the Vietnam War as well and in Vietnamese politics. Kissinger had been one of the most powerful national security advisors of the United States. Kissinger was accused of prolonging the Vietnam War by influencing United States' policies in Indochina. During Kissinger's tenure, U.S. dropped 9 billion pounds of ammunition in Indochina. And in 1971, Kissinger had secret meetings with Vietnam's Lee Duc Tho. The meetings eventually led to the Paris Peace Accords, and the peace accords called for an end to U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Kissinger managed to withdraw more than 500,000 U.S. troops out of Vietnam. However, the peace accord collapsed and South Vietnam government with it. He was given the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts, which was considered to be very controversial. His detractors say he only led the Southeast Asia into further turmoil. Now, Henry Kissinger also played a pivotal role in shaping the geopolitical landscape during the Indo-Pak War as well. America was caught in a flummox, essentially, when the Indo-Pakistan War began, as China was backing Pakistan and the Soviets were backing India. Now, United States did not cut aid to India and made some rhetorics of warning, but didn't come to outright aid of their ally Pakistan. The declassified documents have added another layer and have exposed Kissinger's efforts to navigate the intricate web of alliances and interests, including his attempts to maintain a delicate balance between supporting Pakistan and avoiding a direct confrontation with India. Kissinger engaged in back-channel diplomacy with leaders of both India and Pakistan. However, the creation of Bangladesh in 1971, with India's help of course, can be seen as one of the weak points of Kissinger's diplomacy. And shifting our focus to Nepal, where a gay couple on Wednesday became the first in the nation to receive official same-sex marriage status. The Himalayan nation is one of the first in Asia to allow it. Pictures on your screens. This comes 5 months after the Supreme Court issued an interim order clearing the way for such marriages in the largely conservative country. The marriage is between 36-year-old Ram Bahadur Gurung, who was born male but identifies as female, and Surendra Pandey, 26, who identifies as male. Now, Sunil Babu Pant, an openly gay former parliamentarian and a leading LGBTQ+ rights activist, said that after about 23 years of struggle, we have got this historic achievement, and finally, Maya and Surendra got their marriage registered at the local administration office. Meanwhile, lots of participants held up placards while taking part in a gay pride parade to mark the Pride Month in Kathmandu as well. United States presidential elections and the run-up to it. Lots of political chess pieces moving there. And take a look at this. Donald Trump, he embraced the January 6 rioters as patriots. And he also went on to assure potential pardons if he was to be re-elected to office. His legal team, on the other hand, is facing trouble, which is preparing for the upcoming March 4th hearing and is trying to distance Trump from the rioters and frame them as independent actors. Special counsel Jack Smith contested that Trump is responsible for the Capitol chaos by emphasizing on his supportive rhetoric. While Trump denied wrongdoing and called the case politically motivated, separate civil cases assess his liability for the Capitol attack. The trial's outcome may hinge on defense strategy to minimize links to the rioters and address concerns about jury impact. Over 800 have pleaded guilty or gotten convicted, with 2/3 sentenced to prison, as Trump's rhetoric remains a political focal point. We spoke about the Israel-Hamas war, but there's another war that's raging on between Ukraine and Russia. And building on Ukraine's battlefield and political achievements was a focus for the NATO meeting that took place in Brussels recently. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron spoke to the media during his arrival for the second day of the NATO Foreign Ministers Summit and added that concrete steps were needed to help Ukraine fight Russia, which invaded Ukraine in the February of 2022.
2 weeks ago, I was in Ukraine saying we needed to do everything that we could to help the Ukrainians repel this appalling aggression by Putin. And I'll be building consensus for that view here at NATO today. When you look at the big picture, what's happened recently is the Ukrainians have pushed the Russian Navy right back across the Black Sea. They've opened a shipping lane to get their exports out. Their economy is growing. And of course, they're knocking on the door of both NATO and the EU and getting a very warm response. These are huge achievements, and our job today is to build on those achievements and work out what other concrete steps we can take to help the Ukrainians in their struggle and to show that Russian aggression must never pay.
And that's not all. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned on Wednesday that Russia has amassed a large missile stockpile ahead of winter.
Russia has amassed a large missile stockpile ahead of winter. And we see new attempts to strike Ukraine's power grid and energy infrastructure, trying to leave Ukraine in the dark and cold. Russia is also becoming much more dependent on China. Year by year, Moscow is mortgaging its future to Beijing. Militarily, Russia has lost a substantial part of its conventional forces. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of tanks, and more than 300,000 casualties.
And moving on, Japan has asked the United States to suspend all non-emergency V-22 Osprey flights over its territory following a fatal incident. A fatal incident where one of these aircraft fell into the sea in western Japan on Wednesday. This marks Japan's first fatal US military plane crash in 5 years. And it comes within days of the Japanese Coast Guard reporting that a US military V-22 Osprey aircraft crashed near the island in western Japan on Wednesday with 8 people on board. The crash killed at least 1 person, and the condition of the other 7 is still unknown. Now, the tilt rotor plane, which can fly both like a helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft, is operated by the United States Marines, the United States' Navy, and the Japan Self-Defense Forces. The Osprey has witnessed numerous accidents over the last few years, and the Japan Self-Defense Forces will suspend all flights of the Osprey until the circumstances of the incident are clarified, according to another senior Defense Ministry official who said the same inside the parliament. The Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary has also updated the media about the details of the crash. Let's hear what he has to say.
Today at around 2:40 p.m., we received information that a US military Osprey disappeared from radar off the coast of Yakushima in Kagoshima Prefecture. Along with confirming the severity of injuries, rescue efforts are the highest priority for the government.
Meanwhile, shifting our focus back to that NATO meeting of the foreign ministers, United States' Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he was also in attendance, and he said that there was no sense of fatigue amongst the NATO allies when it came to helping Ukraine. Listen in.
First, we focused on NATO's enduring support and commitment to Ukraine. And I have to tell you, listening to all of our colleagues around the table, every single one expressed strong, enduring support for Ukraine. Some are questioning whether the United States and other NATO allies should continue to stand with Ukraine as we enter the second winter of Putin's brutality. But the answer here today at NATO is clear and it's unwavering. We must and we will continue to support Ukraine. I heard no sense of fatigue or falling back. On the contrary, a determination to continue to press forward. And there's a good reason for that. I think every ally recognizes that this is a matter not only of doing the right thing, it's a matter of self-interest, including for the United States.
Well, meanwhile, the Kremlin, commenting on media reports that Poland plans to send troops to Finland's border with Russia, said that such a move could stoke tensions and that Russia would see it as a threat. Now, the head of Poland's National Security Bureau was reported to have said this week that Warsaw planned to approve a Finnish request for troops to be deployed close to its border with Russia.
Well, there is no conflict as such. Firstly, nothing and no one is threatening Finland. And in this case, this is, of course, an absolutely redundant measure to ensure border security, because there is no threat there. In reality, there is no tension. Tension may actually arise during the concentration of additional units on our border, because the Finns must be clearly aware that this will pose a threat to us. An increase in the concentration of military units on our borders. Therefore, this is a completely unprovoked, unjustified concentration of armed units on the Russian border.
Moving a little bit more east to Pakistan now, where a Pakistani court acquitted former Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in a graft case on Wednesday, clearing a major hurdle for his potential participation in February's parliamentary elections in Pakistan. This decision follows the court's recent restoration of Sharif's right to appeal a 2018 conviction related to luxury apartment purchases in London. Having returned to Pakistan after 4 years of self-exile, Sharif still has to overcome another legal challenge tied to graft charges linked to a 7-year sentence for non-disclosure about his family's 1999 steel mills. Now, Sharif, he resigned in 2017 amid corruption allegations and expressed gratitude for the ruling, emphasizing divine victory. Previously sentenced to a total of 17 years in 2 cases, Sharif's political disqualification per Pakistani law hinged on his particular convictions. But there's another player over here. You've got somebody called Imran Khan as well. The 2018 elections brought Imran Khan as a prominent former cricketer turned politician to power after Sharif's departure. However, Khan was ousted in April 2022 via a no-confidence vote and is currently serving a 3-year prison sentence on corruption charges himself. Despite his incarceration, Khan remains a leading opposition figure, with his Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party maintaining substantial support. And in terms of good news for Pakistan, the UAE is likely to invest between $20 to $25 billion in the financially strained country through a series of agreements. The signing ceremony followed discussions between caretaker Prime Minister Anwarul Haq Kakkar and the UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The memorandums of understandings encompass collaborative investments spanning various sectors, including energy, port operations, food security, mining, aviation, and banking. This financial influx is a welcome development for Pakistan, which has grappled with a deteriorating economy, acute balance of payments, the challenges, and the diminishing foreign exchange reserves. Now, during the bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister Kakkar and Sheikh Mohammed, which was also attended by the Chief of Army Staff General Syed Asim Munir, both these leaders expressed their commitment to enhancing strategic cooperation and dialogue as well. Prime Minister Kakkar extended gratitude to the UAE's leadership for unwavering support in the economic and financial domains to Pakistan. And moving on from a fresh alert on the perils of artificial intelligence to Russia's ambition to compete with the Western technology. Take a look at these major stories of the week in terms of artificial intelligence revolution.
From an extinction warning for humans to what Vladimir Putin thinks about artificial intelligence, this is Generation AI. OpenAI staff warned the company's board of a breakthrough in tech that could endanger humanity. That's according to Reuters sources. Details of the warning remain unknown, but it was reportedly a key development ahead of boss Sam Altman's brief ousting from the company. Vladimir Putin says the West can't be allowed a monopoly on AI. The Russian president says his country must massively scale up its supercomputing capacity and said a new national AI strategy would soon be agreed. But observers say Moscow is hindered by sanctions and an outflow of tech talent following the conflict in Ukraine. NVIDIA appears to have delayed the launch of new AI chips for China. They're supposed to get around US controls on the exports of the most cutting-edge silicon. But Reuters sources say the products are delayed, potentially creating an opportunity for Chinese rivals like Huawei. Amazon has unveiled its own chip aimed at cloud computing applications. It's designed to train AI systems and is said to be 4 times faster than an earlier version. The move steps up rivalry with Microsoft, which unveiled its own custom silicon just weeks ago. The US, UK, and more than a dozen other countries unveiled a plan to keep AI safe from rogue actors. Critics say the agreement isn't binding and is full of general recommendations like keeping AI safe from abuse. But US regulators say it's important that so many nations have committed to putting safety first.
And, well, from a fresh alert on the perils of artificial intelligence to Russia's ambition to compete with Western technology, we just took a look at what's really happening in terms of artificial intelligence, Generation AI, ladies and gentlemen. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi is traveling to Dubai from the 30th of November to the 1st of December 2023 to attend the World Climate Action Summit. The World Climate Action Summit is the high-level segment of the 28th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. To the UNFCCC provides a unique opportunity to impart momentum for the collective action towards combating the shared challenge of climate change. During COP26 in Glasgow back in 2021, the Prime Minister had announced 5 specific targets titled Panch Amrit, as India's unprecedented contribution to climate action. The PM had also announced Mission Lifestyle for Environment, called LIFE, on that very occasion itself. Now, climate change has been an important priority area for India's G20 presidency, and significant new steps have been captured in the New Delhi leaders' declaration and other outcomes during our presidency. During his visit, the Prime Minister will also be holding bilateral meetings with some of the leaders participating in the summit. Visuals on your screens of the Expo City, where COP28 is going to take place, where Prime Minister Modi is going to be in attendance with all the who's who of the conference of parties. Meanwhile, our Foreign Secretary, Vinay Quatra, he spoke about Prime Minister's visit to UAE. Let's listen to what he had to say.
In terms of Prime Minister's participation at the COP28, Honorable Prime Minister will deliver his address at the opening session of the World Climate Action Summit. Besides his address to the COP28, Prime Minister will also be participating in 3 high-level side events, of which 2 are being co-hosted by India. The first high-level event, which is being co-hosted by India and the UAE, is the launch of Green Credits Initiative. If you would recall, this was something which was rolled out earlier this month or late last month by the Ministry of Environment in India. The Green Credits Initiative is based on the Green Credit Program, which was notified by the Ministry of Environment in October this year, and basically envisions the issue of green credits for plantations on waste and degraded lands and the river catchment areas in order to restore their vitality. The second event, which is co-hosted by India and Sweden, is the launch of Lead IT 2.0, Leadership Group for Industry Transition 2.0. This, you would recall, was a joint initiative launched by India and Sweden in 2019 at the UN Climate Action Summit in New York. Essentially, this initiative fosters collaboration among the decision makers, bringing together both the public sector and the private sector with the objective of accelerating the industry transition to net zero emissions, essentially from heavy industries.
Well, now, just like Vinay Quatra was speaking at COP28 in Dubai, nearly 200 nations are going to converge, each with its own unique agenda. Achieving consensus poses a formidable challenge, given that unanimous support is requisite for the United Nations climate negotiations to advance. Take a look at the key players and their respective objectives this time around.
Each country has its own agenda for the nearly 200 nations gathering at COP28 in Dubai. And finding consensus is a challenge, as UN climate negotiations need unanimous support to pass. Here are some of the climate summit's main players and what they're looking for. China, the world leader in both clean and dirty energy. It's responsible for 30% of annual global emissions, making it the world's biggest greenhouse gas emitter. But it also has more renewable energy capacity than anywhere else. China has been feeling the impacts of climate change through heat waves, floods, and extreme drought. Despite having the world's second largest economy after the US, it sees itself as a developing nation in climate talks and argues wealthy, developed nations like the US should move first and fastest in policy and finance. It's part of the bloc of basic countries alongside South Africa, Brazil, and India, who argue the same. The United States is the world's second largest emitter. It comes to COP28 a year into rolling out a $369 billion plus subsidy package for electric vehicles and other green products.
Its Inflation Reduction Act is expected to triple the country's clean energy capacity by 2030. But U.S. delegates will face pressure at COP28 after Washington pledged no new climate cash to the United Nations this year. It supports a COP28 deal to phase out CO2-emitting fossil fuel use, despite being the world's biggest oil and gas producer. The 27-country European Union is among the most ambitious. The bloc, along with the U.S., is pushing to triple renewable capacity. It also aims to end new coal-fueled power plants, phase out fossil fuels, and power electricity grids with renewable sources in the 2030s. African countries are pushing for climate finance to speed up green energy projects. But not everyone's on the same page. Some, like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Senegal, have backed calls for phasing out fossil fuel production. Others, like Mozambique, want to develop their reserve of gas to capitalize off European gas demands. But they do agree that any deal on phasing out fossil fuels must allow poor nations to develop reserves in the short term to alleviate energy poverty.
Well, so you got to understand the who's who, the key players. We'll have to wait and find out what really happens at the COP28. Meanwhile, that's all the time we have for you in this edition of Top Stories. Lots more continues right on the other side. Don't go anywhere. Hamas attacks Israel. Israel Defense Forces strike back at Hamas.